thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we continue with part 12 of Fundamental Laws, a report of the 68th Convocation of the Rose+croix Order. Authority versus individuality. From time immemorial, there have existed two schools of thought, the one standing for the suppression of the freedom of thought by the masses, and the other for the freedom of the individual development and initiative. For convenience sake, we will call the first the de-evolutionary school, and the second the evolutionary school. The first denies the principle of evolution as applied to the individual, while the second considers the law of life, which is the law of growth, is for differentiation and individualization. The de-evolutionary school has no faith in the people, considers them incapable of governing themselves or thinking for themselves, and has no higher hope for the masses than living a life of labor and slaving for the privileged few at the top. Those who belong to this school are men who have obtained superior intelligence, but are selfish, self-seeking, ambitious for power, and are obsessed with the desire to rule and govern. They are the backbone, brains, and power of the dominant church and political parties, the two main instruments of power that have controlled and are controlling and governing the public mind. And whenever possible and convenient, the church and the state, which is usually a political machine, have united to share the power of control over the people, for both recognize they are dependent upon each other to maintain their authority over the people. The church, by teaching fear and respect for authority, can influence the people to become submissive to the governing powers, and the state, by passing laws, can protect the church from untoward influences. The established church has always stood for every moment which would curtail the freedom of the individual and make him subservient to its authority. In every age and among every nation, we find this to be a fact. The de-evolutionary school has the greatest contempt for the intelligence of the masses and believes that the greatest good for the common people can best be obtained by centralizing the power of government in the hands of a few individuals who God created with superior attainments for the express purpose of acting as his vicegerents on earth. They would deny the people freedom of thought and of choice, and consider themselves best fitted to think and choose for the needs of the masses. They consider individual development and initiative as inconsistent to centralized power and dangerous to its authority. They are self-appointed God's agents on earth with the powers to forgive sins, remit transgressions against divine law, and give a ticket of admission to heaven, or condemn souls to hell, depending on the attitude of the individual to their authority. On the other hand, the evolutionary school stands squarely for individual effort and initiative, and individual freedom of thought and of choice. They consider that the law of evolution as applied to man is for differentiation and individualization, and that any interference with this law brings about dire results. For a time only can authority hold back the progress of the masses in individual unfoldment. But as this is contrary to the law of nature, nature has its way of ridding itself of intolerable conditions, resulting in cataclysms, revolutions, and wars. The evolutionary school would work in harmony with nature and allow the individual full liberty of unfoldment, freedom of thought, belief, and choice, insofar as it would help him grow, without interfering with the freedom of others and with no injury to society. This school thinks that the world can be made better and mankind be best benefited only through the development of the individual, and that as he grows, unfolds, and is made to understand and recognize individual responsibility, is he in a position to help himself and his fellow men. When man is taught that as he sows, so will he reap, that every act and every thought produces definite results, good or bad, according to the deed and thought, that no one can stand between him and his Creator and delegate to himself authority to forgive sins committed, and that every sin committed brings about just punishment commensurate with the performance of the act. then the individual will begin to feel moral responsibility and will be careful as to his mode of living. The danger in allowing a few persons to control the public mind and conscience lies in the fact that it breeds an opportunity for developing selfish, self-seeking, and power-mad men. Such men are unfit to be entrusted with the interest of the people, for they can use their power for evil and for self, as against the best interest of the people. Such men would keep the people in darkness and in ignorance, and would stifle individual effort, lest the masses wake up and remove them from power. Authority is the result of a few individuals at the top delegating to themselves power and prerogatives, and constituting themselves the control to judge, to rule, and to dominate. In time, you may be sure they will see to it that they will instill and foster respect from the people for their authority. And in time, the people come to worship this authority as a fetish or idol to such an extent that they will fear to think for themselves, so that if any new teacher arises or new ideas are pushed forward, which might be contrary to the teachings of the established church and political machine in power, no matter how beneficial it might prove to the interest of the people, the authorities, perceiving the danger to their power, immediately endeavor to suppress the new teacher and his teachings, on the grounds that the new teachings are heretical and inimical to the welfare of society, and the teacher is an enemy of the people, and the people, having become like sheep, having lost the power to think for themselves, owing to mental paralysis from fear, cannot think or judge for themselves as to the truth or falsity of the new teachings, but, comparing it with the established or authoritative teachings, and finding no harmony, condemn both the new teacher and the new teachings. Remember the experience of the Master Jesus with the established church of his day and its authorities, and this has been the experience of every great teacher in every age. So effectually have the self-constituted authorities taught the people for thousands of years respect for their authority that the masses have lost the power to think for themselves. They have become slaves to authority, which robs them of free will and free choice, and which denies them freedom of action, and stifles initiative, the greatest factor in man, which if rightly exercised, leads to the greatest amount of good. As long as the people are rooted down to authority, they are helpless and at the mercy of unscrupulous and selfish men in power. The greatest weapon in the hands of authority, which enables them to control the masses, is fear. The people are imbued with fear for this or that, are born into fear, live a life of fear, and die with and on account of fear. And those in authority have encouraged the people to fear, for herein rests their control and power. If the authorities have encouraged the people to think instead of fear, they would soon lose their hold on the public mind. The people actually sleep away their lives through fear of being awake. They fear to breathe. They fear to think for themselves. They fear to cross authority. They fear to live their lives in accordance with the dictates of their conscience and live rather in accordance with opinions outside of themselves. They fear disease. They fear death. They fear to express themselves, and they fear to assert themselves. Fear has become so rooted in their nature as to paralyze their thoughts and make of them mere automatons subject to the control of authority. Many grand ideas have been stifled and many noble desires have been suppressed because of public opinion, which is really authority. For, strictly speaking, there is no such thing as public opinion, for few people have a mind of their own, but think and do what their authorities desire them to think and do. The subjugation of the people to authority is manifested in every department of life. Through fear, the people are in bondage to the authoritative school of medicine. The subjugation of the people to authority is manifested in every department of life. Through fear, the people are in bondage to the authoritative school of medicine. The people submit to inocculations, to unnecessary pain and torture on the account of their submission to authority. In science, in religious thought, and in every phase of life, it is remarkable how tremendously powerful is the control of authority over the masses. This condition has always prevailed. Individual effort and freedom of thought has always been in conflict with authority. Every great thinker, every great master and teacher has been subjected to the greatest trials and in many cases have met death for daring to teach the truth and to assert their individuality. Remember the experience of the Master Jesus with the authoritative school of his day. And when he came into the temple, the chief priests and elders of the people came unto him as he was teaching and said, By what authority doest thou these things? And who gave thee this authority? Moses had the same experience. And Pharaoh said, Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go. The de-evolutionary school in all ages, represented by the authoritative church and state, has never been friendly to progress, and if any advancement has been made, it has been accomplished in conflict and in spite of authoritative teachings and not because of its support. If the people would have the courage to think for themselves, to live a natural life, and to act in accordance with the dictates of their higher promptings, what a beautiful world this would be. If the people would only be taught to exercise their God-given faculties instead of depending on authorities for their welfare, what a change in social, economic, and religious thought of the world we would witness. But the de-evolutionary school desires the masses to be dependent upon them, so as to strengthen their power over them. And this pernicious teaching has been inculcated so long that it has become inbred with the people to the extent that they are satisfied with things as they are and assist the authorities in fighting any change, no matter how beneficial it might be to their interest. Jesus said to the people, And think not to say within yourselves, We have Abraham to our father. What matters it what the people believe in? One system of authoritative belief is as good as another, as long as the people are compelled to blindly worship a system instead of truth itself. No belief, no matter under what name or in what age, unless accomplished by works, and unless it encourages independent thought and individual unfoldment, has ever accomplished any good in this world. It is not what the people believe in that counts, but it is what they do and how they live, and how happy and contented society is. And judged by this standard, all authoritative systems of the de-evolutionary school, depending on the blind worship of the masses, are negative and deconstructive in tendency. The only authority one needs to guide one's footsteps and the safest one to go by is the conscience within each person. God has placed in each human breast a greater judge than any moral judge, and that is the conscience, which is the voice of God, speaking to us through our soul. Man is endowed by his Creator with free will, free choice, a conscience, and a mind. Evidently, God intended us to exercise these faculties, to think for ourselves, to choose for ourselves, to will and to judge for ourselves. Otherwise, had he not intended us to use these faculties, but expected us to depend on authorities, then why would he endow us with these faculties at all? If a man is made in the image of God, to will, to do, to think, and to create, he will attain his higher selfhood only through the exercise of his God-given faculties, and this presupposes individual unfoldment. Under most authoritative teachings, these faculties are asleep in man, with the result that the people are compelled to depend on their authorities to do their thinking and choosing and deciding, whereas the scheme of creation is for individual unfoldment of faculties and the exercise of the same for individual advancement and growth. Conscience, if rightly exercised and frequently consulted, will never fail us in determining the true from the false, the right from the wrong, the essential from the non-essential. There is no higher authority than God. God having created us, He has not forsaken us, nor has he left us without a guide, and this guide is our intuition. But man chooses to turn his back on his intuition and God and listen to authoritative advice outside of himself, which in most cases is not to his best interest. A noteworthy thing about the teachings of Jesus and the power he manifested is the fact that he never theorized. He spoke as one, having authority, and the authority he obeyed was the God within him, represented by his illumined soul. His mission was to teach men to use their God-given faculties, and because he champions the cause of the individual as against the interest of the authoritative church and state of his day, he was put to death. It has ever been thus. The hope of mankind is in the welfare and intelligence of its individual members. Those nations who have given their citizens greater opportunities for initiative and intelligent unfoldment are more effective and further advanced in civilization. History is replete with examples to illustrate this point, and nowhere is it more evident than in the present conflagration in Europe. And this conflagration, if it will teach the world any lessons, will advance the cause of individualism and bring home the truth that a people's greatness and efficiency lies in giving the individual freedom of action and freedom of unfoldment, restricting this freedom only to the extent of preventing interference with personal rights. Any attempt to dam a stream results in a flood, and to attempt to prevent the individual growth of a people is as futile as damming a stream. Evolution is for differentiation and individualism. We perceive that the more civilized a people, the more unlike are its members. In proportion that a people have encouraged individualism, in just that proportion have they prospered, and in proportion that the people have been suppressed, in that proportion have they shown barbarism, stagnation, and decay. History is replete with examples of the downfall of nations because of the suppression of individualism. Individual unfoldment is the only solution for the welfare of the race. It is the law of growth. It is nature in its constructive operation. If the world is to become better, we must start with the individual, and as he unfolds, becomes more responsible, a moral being. He rises his environment and influences for good of his fellow men with whom he comes in contact. He becomes a lightened city on a hilltop, a man who evolves towards godhood and becomes a morally responsible being, realizes his accountability to God for his thoughts and actions, will be a more law-abiding citizen, a better father and husband, and will display more respect for the rights of his fellow men. Individual unfoldment teaches a man self-respect and respect for the welfare of others. The greatest nations in the world have been those who have zealously guarded the principle of life. The principle of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all its citizens. This nation was founded on this principle, and this nation has thus far prospered because it has protected its individuals in their pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, and has offered its citizens the greatest opportunities of individual expansion and assertion. And this nation will go down, if it ever will, because it will have trampled this principle in the dust and attempt to suppress individualism. We recognize that governments cannot, by compulsion and legislation, bring about a condition of goodness, virtue, and intelligence among its people. We recognize that this is an individual problem and that it is a matter of growth. We recognize that the function of governments is to give its people the greatest individual freedom of thought and of action. We have heard so much that men are born free and equal. This is not so. There is no equality of men. We are born free to live, to use our will for the accomplishment of laudable undertakings, to choose a worthy life, to attain noble ideals, and to exercise our God-given faculties. But we are not born equal. No two individuals are alike, because no two individuals have lived alike or developed alike. The law of nature is for differentiation. The only equality that men possess in common is the equal opportunity to do, to develop, and to accomplish. We all have the same opportunity to enrich our hearts with goodness and love and to evolve towards godhood. Men and despotic governments may deprive us of material wealth and enslave our bodies, but they cannot rob us of spiritual wealth nor enslave our souls. We alone are the masters of our solar destinies. We alone can free our souls from material despotism. We alone can make our lives a blessing to mankind or an abomination to our fellow men. We alone are gods or devils in the making, depending on the path we choose to travel. God has given us all divine faculties, which through our own efforts and the training and soul building offered by soul science can help us overcome all adverse circumstances. In our lectures here, we speak a great deal of self-development and unfoldment. To one who is not entirely acquainted with our teachings, it might appear as if our teachings are selfish, in that the individual is concerned with his own welfare only and might become so wrapped up with his own particular growth as to forget the welfare of his fellow men. There cannot be true individual development if based on selfishness. True individual unfoldment is based on true unselfishness. There can be no progress except through self-sacrifice for mankind. Only through service for our brethren can we gain wisdom and power, and our growth on the path of attainment will be in proportion to the amount of service we give to mankind. There was no selfishness in the life of Jesus. He attained his greatness and power through a life of self-sacrifice for mankind. And the student who desires to grow, to do, and to accomplish must pattern his life after the life of Jesus. The person who truly seeks self-development does so with the thought only that by his growth and attainment he can do more for his fellow men. If he desires to help his fellow men, will he not be of greater help? If he becomes stronger, healthier, happier, and wiser, we can give only as much as we possess. If we possess little, we can offer but little. But if we possess much, how much more we can be of help? The Master has said, "Whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." The individual who desires to be of real and true service to mankind must first deny or give up one's baser or lower self, and take up the cross of self-sacrifice and be prepared to be crucified on the cross of authority. Just in proportion that the individual gives of his time, labor, and life in helping his less fortunate brethren to a realization of a better day, in that proportion will he receive from God wisdom and power. Soul science recognizes that the hope of the world for a better day lies in individual betterment. In proportion that individuals become self-helpful, morally responsible, thinkers, independent of external authority, exercising their free will and free choice, will the world become a better place to live in. Our environment is the reflection of internal states or conditions within ourselves, and when we improve ourselves, we improve our environment. Therefore, the starting point is the individual, and so science teaches the individual to help himself to become real men and real women, for women have an equal share in the world's work. So science teaches men moral responsibility and individual accountability. It teaches men to become free from the domination of external authoritative teachings, free from slavery to debasing environments. So science teaches intuitional developments, the inner voice of the soul, that godly authority within us. For man's unfailing and infallible authority is within himself and not outside of himself. If man is in full possession of all his divine faculties, and if he develops intuition, he has within all the authority he needs to guide him to righteousness, to wisdom and power, and to freedom. Blessed are they who hear the voice. Thrice blessed are they who obey it. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.